T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now controlling. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station. Atlantis now on the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the pocket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier.
Well, we are live here for a great webinar on how to start podcasting, which I think is a question that so many people have. I know, but I've been asked that several times in the past year. And my name is Jason. I'm a multi-time entrepreneur, a faculty member of the community. And I'm here with my great friend and colleague, Naomi Ahlstrom. Welcome, Naomi. How to start podcasting.
Woo! Here we go.
Now, I've done 500 or more episodes of podcasts and live streams, and so I come at this a bit hot. And there's all sorts of things that have escaped my mind that I've learned through the years. And I'm so excited to be with you today, Naomi, because you are just going to start launching your first podcast a week from now.
Yes, in exactly 1 week, I'll be airing the first episode. Well, not airing, live streaming the first episode of my podcast called The Chronic Noob.
The Chronic Noob. That's such an interesting name. Where did that name come from?
Well, I don't know a lot. I am new to the business world. I've been dipping my foot in the water when it comes to professionalism and things. And as I've been taking different steps, I have wanted to learn different things, and it's been daunting. It's been daunting as heck. And I wanted to create a space where I could learn something and maybe other people can learn it along with me. And if I crash and burn, then other people might be able to learn from my mistakes and not make the same mistakes as I make. So I just want to give people permission to learn and maybe look at something from a different perspective that they hadn't thought of before. So maybe they think they know something, and maybe I can add a little wisdom to the knowledge they already have.
That is, I think, a fantastic goal. So I'm super excited about tonight because how to start podcasting is not only going to benefit you, but it's going to benefit our community. And I love that you come in here with that heart of walking alongside folks who are just starting out, because like you mentioned, it can be daunting. And especially when we're looking at the universe of things that we might need to think about. And tonight we're going to think about 3 major topics, which are vision and prep. What is the vision for your podcast? How do you prep for that? And then what does this even look like? What is my podcast going to be? And then and even if we have those things together, how then do we put this together into a plan and a process that we can follow that actually makes sense? There's a lot more to cover here than I think people realize, which is why so many people start podcasts and then stop them before they even get their 3rd or 4th episode out.
Yeah, I'm going to be, this is my very first ever webinar. So this is something that hopefully this will help me practice a little bit. I'm expecting it to be uncomfortable. I'm expecting it to be, difficult. And I'm hoping that as I go through this learning process, as I kind of go over what I've learned when building a podcast and what I've learned in producing the podcast that I'm working on, hopefully I can be able to push through those first 3 or 4, like you mentioned.
Absolutely. Well, I have complete confidence in you. And for our viewers and listeners, I'm so happy that you're here. Now, this is a service to the Thinker Growth community, which you can find at thinkergrowth.com. Tonight, we're talking about how to start podcasting, and this is our roadmap. We're going to talk about the strategy that you need to think about when producing an outstanding podcast. We're also going to talk about tools and technology, which you might not have considered before, the process which you need to follow for a repeatable podcast production, and then repeatable podcast production. You should say that 10 times fast. And then we get into promotion, because it's not true that if you build it, they will come. We're also going to talk about distribution. And then lastly, we're going to touch on the business of podcasting, because it's one thing to have a podcast just because it's you and your buddies talking and having a good time. And then there's another layer on that, which is if it's going to serve a business purpose for you, we have revenue involved, we have expenses involved, and we really need to think about what purpose does this serve in our business. So tonight we're going to talk about all of these things, but first, Naomi, would you kick us off here? The podcast foundation, the reason and concept. I know you put some effort into this for the Chronic Noob. Walk us through this
Yes.
idea of the reason and the concept for a podcast.
Okay, so the reason to start a podcast is you need to ask yourself, why do I want to start a podcast? If you don't have a reason, what are you even doing trying to put your voice out there if you don't have a reason to put it out there, if you don't have a message? So the reason you'd want to start a podcast, for me, I mean, I already went over that a little bit, but that goes into what purpose does it serve? You need to ask yourself what purpose it serves. What goals will it help me achieve? For me, my podcast is going to be, not only will I be learning something, but I'll be solidifying what I'm learning as I try and help others learn it along with me. How does it serve my business? That one will be up to you. I mean, for me personally, I'm a manager in the Thinker Growth community, and it will help bring people to the community to learn more about business building skills that we like to teach and provide classes on. So it'll help promote that business. And how does it edify my life on a personal level? As I've mentioned, I'm coming into this professional world brand spanking new. I have no idea what I'm doing, and I will be the first to admit that. I am proud of it. I am brand spanking new to all of it, and I want to learn. I want to drink it all in. So that's how it's going to edify me on a personal level, because it'll give me that outlet, that push to learn a lot more than I thought I ever could. Now,
One thing that you mentioned in there, in this idea of you want to help people along with you on your journey and
Mhm.
teach them the things that you're learning. There is a quote, and I'll butcher it. I'm certain of it, but the quote is to the effect that you really don't know something. You don't truly know something until you can teach it, and that I've found to be so true. Which is, I think, what you're talking about for that purpose for the Chronic Noob, that you want to not only make it acceptable, open up the doors that, hey, you know what, if you're new at something, that's great. That's the best place to be because you're learning something. But then also, hey, walk with me, and here's the things that I'm learning, and bring people along on the journey. So the next thing is we talk about the concept. So we need to have a fundamental reason for why we do something. And then we've got the concept, which is that umbrella for our podcast.
Yes, the concept, you need to ask yourself, what is the hell yeah moment? And a hell yeah moment is defined as something that there needs to be some kind of reason someone comes there. There needs to be some kind of epiphany that someone will have. There needs to be, it needs to provoke a certain mindset or idea. And it might be something that you already have in mind, but maybe you want it to be self-reflection, and maybe everyone's going to walk away with something different. So there needs to be that hell yeah moment. What's that moment? You need to have that ready to go. You need to have that moment ready. You need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of that, pinpoint that for each episode. You need to decide what you're going to name it.
That's a big one. People, I want to
yeah.
throw out some pointers there because I've been doing naming stuff for, it seems, for forever. And the last company I named was a merger between a $175 million company and a $150 million company. And the smaller one was buying the bigger one. And the question was, what do we name this thing? We've got two big entities known in the marketplace. When we come together, what is this thing going to be? Because you can alienate people by what you name something. You can also bring some people in by what you name it. And so a handful of things that I like to follow are: number one, is it simple? Is that name simple? Is it just flow off the tongue? Is it informative? Is it very descriptive of what that product is? And everybody who has heard a pharmaceutical commercial knows when they hear the pharmaceutical commercial, it's just a big, it's kind of a big joke. It's philoximilabadab. It's like, oh, it must be a pharmaceutical. You'd never name a retail store that, right?
Nope.
Intriguing. Think of the name as, does it invoke intrigue? Does it make somebody want to go further? And then, so here's a couple pointers. Number one, do a Google search. If the domain name is available, likely that name is going to be available. Just do a Google search. So like if you went to thinkergrowth.com, I already know a Thinker Growth community is available. Thinkergrowth.com. It was available. Ta-da, it's the Thinker Growth community. And then, is there a YouTube channel? Now, when you were doing some research on the Chronic Noob, there were other channels named the Chronic Noob, but they were years old. They weren't updated. No activity on them. And chronicnoob.com was available. And boom.
Yes.
So the space really was available. And if you don't do some basic research, you might end up on somebody's trademark or copyright. And then you're in trouble. Right. And then also, I think this idea of the concept is how does it look? What's the personality? And one of the tips that I like to throw out, we talked about this, Naomi, is if you're thinking about a company or a style or a personal brand or a podcast, what's a movie that you have watched that you think that's the personality? And better yet, what's the character in that movie? Who is the character that personifies the personality that I want to present? That is a great test of any personal brand or any podcast or any video cast. What's the movie? And that's a way, I think, of really funneling down, because movies are just dripping with brand recognition.
And there's always a character you can connect with as well. And then you want to emulate that character. So yeah,
absolutely. And it has to be also, I think, be particularly like in the case of your podcast, if this is your voice, this is you coming forward, it really has to find its roots in here. But so it can't be inauthentic.
Yes,
that's a no. People can smell that a mile away.
And this is something that I don't know what it is, but people think that authenticity is if it's filtered authenticity, or if it's just a little bit of authenticity, that's authentic, and that's not going to get you anywhere. People can tell. People can tell if you're authentic. People can tell if you're straightforward. People can tell if you're hiding something. People can tell if you're putting up a front or acting like you know something you don't, or acting like you don't know something that you do. You want to be authentic, and that comes across with the information you share, but also the voice you put out. That is so important across the board. You can't decide on a character and put out that specific character. I mean, unless you're really, really committed. If it's not going to be authentic, it will be exhausting. You will burn yourself out. You'll grow to hate it. It'll be a resentment. Unless it's a specific character you're putting on, like there's TikTok stars that put on different characters, that's one thing. But when it comes to a podcast, when it comes to something you're passionate about, a message you want to share, you must share it in the way that is most you. If you're not sharing it in the way that's most you, no one's going to connect with it. No one's going to feel it, because you're not speaking from the heart. You're not grounded. You're not centered. You have to be authentic in your voice.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. So a lot of things to think about when we're first starting the podcast. One thing we want to talk about is this knowledge that you need to know or decide before you start. And there really are a handful of things that everyone who podcasts needs to think about so that you don't waste your time and effort and so that you really are committed to this venture and get it off the ground. So one is that we really need to consider who your audience is and how is your message going to edify them, like we talked about before. What topics are you going to think about? I've got my good friend Paul, who's actually a faculty member in the growth community as well. He was thinking of resurrecting a podcast, and he came off with 52 topics, one for every week of the year, to figure out, is this a path? Is this a journey that he would like to go on and that his listeners would like to go on? Something super interesting to think about. What are the topics I might cover? Also, who are the guests? Who are the guests that I might have on this? Is it my friends? I was at the dinner the other night with a good buddy of mine, and in the middle of a delicious Mexican dinner, he says, we should start a podcast. And I was like, oh, okay. And everybody's got an idea, but his podcast idea was really just birthed from he and me just chatting about life and joking about all sorts of things, which the next day are not nearly as funny. They're not something I might commit to, right? So who might be my guests? Think past the couple of guests that are right on the top of your mind. I think, where am I going to take this? And that's what I did. There's a podcast I did a long time ago called What Works, and that's just coming back now. And at one point in time, I retooled the whole thing and decided I'm only going to talk with published authors. And so What Works with Jason Todd is now only with published authors. And my guest list are people who I have probably read their book. It's meant something to me, and they're willing to be on the podcast. And then we have these lengthy conversations. So think about your guests, because this idea of sustainability, I think, is so important. Too many times, and I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk recently came off with the statistic that 80% podcast creation is down 80% from 2020. And that was because it filled a void. Yeah. It filled a void because people were sitting at home, not doing the things that they used to do. And they were like, I need to talk to somebody. So they created podcasts, but they weren't sustainable. And maybe they were never meant to be sustainable. But I think a lot of people start things and then think, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be doing this forever. And it turns out now there's no sustainability behind it. It really is something that we need to think about, is particularly if the podcast is going to be in a series or a link in chains, or a link in the chain of people who are going to buy from us. And then I want to get to this thing called setting. You and I went around and around on this. Walk us through setting and how important that is, because I think it's something people don't really consider when they're thinking about podcasting.
Okay, this is such a huge one. Obviously, you have the voice, the podcast, right? You have the reason, the concept, what's the big idea, why do I want to start a podcast? Now, the thing is, you don't know about going into that is you have to set it up. And that's going to be in two different ways. Well, and there's going to be where you are, the setting in which you record the podcast, but also the setting in which you promote or share the podcast. And that setting is going to be through branding, tone, music, voiceovers, your intro, your artwork, those kinds of things. But the setting of where you record your podcast, it has to be able to be a setting where you can create the promotional setting you want. Does that make sense? So
yeah, your vision.
Your vision. You need to have the vision that you want, that authenticity. How are you going to make it you? So the setting in which you record, it can be anywhere from a home office to a studio, to your car, out on the street, in the woods somewhere, if that's your thing and you want to, record nature sounds, ASMR, those kinds of things, whatever you want to do with your podcast, the setting, it can be so many different levels, and that'll actually determine the equipment you want to have, which we will go over later. But the setting is very important. I do want to backtrack a little bit on when it comes to audience and sustainability. We had talked about authenticity before. Audience and sustainability are directly tied to authenticity. Here's how. Like I said, you will wear yourself out if you are not being authentic. Now, the audience that you are going for, they're going to be people who connect with you, people who either want, who look up to you, want to emulate you, or people who are in the same situation and would like some guidance. In some way, shape, or form, your audience is going to be people who are where you are at or where you have been, because they want to see how you do it, and they want to be led and guided in whatever journey you're taking and whatever message you're sharing. So in part, your audience, a lot of the time, most of the time, will look like you. And which is why it's important to be authentic and create a sustainability, and why it's so important to have that, the reason why you want to start the podcast in the first place, how it all comes full circle is the reason you want to start the podcast is usually because there's something that you didn't have that you want to provide other people with. So being authentic in that message and sharing that will create sustainability, because you'll have that passion already driving you. And then you will also be able to speak to the audience that will connect with you the most. Don't worry about getting a different kind of audience. Don't stress about it. Do not stress about it. Don't stress about, oh, I wish those kinds of people would listen, or those. Don't sweat it. You will attract the kind of people who will be hit the hardest with the message that you have to share. It will create the sustainability, and it will help you, because you're being authentic. You'll be able to create the setting, the vision that you have. It will come naturally. It will just come naturally. I promise. If you just stay true to that.
So I was meeting with a friend of mine who's a real estate agent and owns a property management company, and he wanted to do a podcast, a video cast actually, in his community to inform people about what's going on. When we met, he wanted to record it in his office, and I suggested, well, if you want to show people what's going on in the community, or talk about what's going on in the community, you want to show that to them. You might want to consider taking this on the road. And here's what that looks like. Here's the equipment that's involved. Here's the time that's involved. Here's the post-production that's involved. Here are the things that are involved. And the reason I brought that up to him, and why I'm bringing it up now, is many times if we don't set that vision in front of us, we don't count the cost and what's required to achieve that vision. So we don't put in enough effort. We don't put in enough planning. We don't put in enough resources to achieve the vision. And then we say, it's a bad vision. Not necessarily true. You didn't think about what it takes to achieve that vision. And these are the things like tone and personality for my vision. If I'm going to be walking around town showing people about my community, what's the music? What's the intro? What's the outro? How does this thing come together like a sitcom type? Is it the sitcom type feel, or am I at a community orchestra type feel? Those things are important when we're thinking about the vision, because if we don't, then we don't properly plan for hardware and software requirements. So if we're sitting in our office, we might have a standalone a mounted microphone, like I've got this one here, and I've got actually a couple different types of microphones around here depending on what I'm doing. You've got the microphone that's sitting on your desk. Headphones. I'm using AirPods here, but I'm using this microphone because when I use my AirPods and use them as a microphone, the sound quality drops. A lot of people don't think of that. I sound like I'm in a tin can if I use these as speaking and listening on a computer. And then, so I've got actually over the ear headphones that I might use for certain tasks. In addition, if I'm going to be out and about, right? I'm not going to use these AirPods. I'm going to use maybe a clip-on microphone, or I have a shotgun microphone which sits on top of my camera, which picks up in a directional fashion, and I can
Oh,
hear everything in
interesting.
front of me without seeing a microphone on the person. It's all on the body of the camera. Super easy, doesn't require a lot of fuss and muss. So there's all these different options to think about depending on what your vision is for your podcast. And even down to the hardware requirements, like how does this stuff get into the computer? It can be super confusing. And you and I talked at length about this, and I understand it's confusing. I've been doing this stuff for a long, long time,
I'm so
and
intimidated.
and you should be, and that's okay, right? Everybody comes at this and like, man, I'm intimidated, only because you've never done it before, and
Mhm.
that's why we're doing this. That's why we're doing the podcast, the webinar tonight, and that's why this goes back into the growth community, because when people have those individual questions, just ask them in the thinker growth community. Ask them, and a
Yep.
faculty member, myself or somebody else, will come on there and we will answer you, because fundamentally, like you talk about, if we
Mhm.
believe that if you have a message that will change the world, it could be something you want to say, it could be something you
Mhm.
want to sell, a product or a service, it could be something you want to do, community you want to build. If you have a message that you believe could change the world, you got to be really good. We think you should be really good at sharing that message, and we want to give you the tools and resources to do that.
Yes.
We also have things like software and whatnot. It gets really
Mhm.
confusing, but you really should know: am I doing video or audio, or am I doing video and audio? Because that drives the requirements for what I might need.
Where your
And
podcast.
absolutely, and whether you should even be
Mm.
doing this or not. Like maybe you shouldn't be editing your own podcast, or maybe you know enough. And then when we get to the business of podcasting, we figure out how we're going to make money with this thing so that we can at least cover our costs. That is a long-winded answer for a very complicated, and I mean, we could go on and on and on,
Oh
but
yeah.
we need to leave it. Uh, moving on, we're talking about podcasting, and we're in the middle of talking about what the process is. What does a podcast look like? Which is pretty straightforward, Naomi, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, you would think there are things that people don't realize. Like before I learned about podcasting, before I started production for mine, I had not thought about music during the podcast. I had not thought about an intro. I hadn't thought about an outro. So those are new concepts for me. They seem so common. Like any video you watch has an intro, has an outro. There's something, you know. Um, so when I saw that as I was learning, as you were teaching me and telling me about the different things, because you've how many podcasts have you done at this point?
Well over 500.
Oh my gosh. So you're a little more experienced in this area than me. So as you've been kind of telling me the ins and outs of it, that was something that really stuck out to me is there are things I didn't even think of, and I didn't even know how to connect them. And we'll give you some. We'll be telling you a little about those things, like the tips and tricks and little things like that, um, later on. But yeah, there were a lot of things I hadn't even considered. It seemed pretty straightforward, but to
Yeah.
me, for a noob, they weren't.
And they really do make a difference. If people were here from the beginning, in all of the beginning of these webinars that we'll do from the growth community, if you've ever seen my webinars, I always have a countdown that allows people to get in, and it's always it's always some sort of video, and there's some music behind it, because I can't stand just opening up to a screen where there's two people on screen and they're like, is everybody in here?
Let's
Everybody,
give it a few
can
more
you hear me?
minutes.
Is this
Yeah,
working?
let's wait for everyone
Like,
to get
come on.
here.
Like, do a tech
Tech
check
check.
before, have your stuff together, and then boom,
Yep.
we count down, and it feels like a show, because
Yeah.
people will spend more on entertainment than they ever will for education. And so we want to blend the two. Even though you have a great message to say, you need to make it entertaining, or people will be
Yep.
like, forget it, I'm out. And so blend the two, have a great intro, which gets into things like music, maybe a branded animation, which you see what the things that we do, and then also the voiceover. Is who's going to do that voiceover, and that voiceover might be something that's specific to that individual episode. Hey, on today's podcast, we're going to be talking with John,
Mhm.
who's Whatsits, and we're going to demystify, why why the refrigerator always is cold. I don't know. So
It's a mystery to me. Thank
it's
you.
Mr.
I've always wanted to learn that. Thank you. Yes, I'm here for that.
We're going to demystify why there's no such thing as cooling. It's only lack of heat. Well, let everybody can noodle on that. That has nothing to do with podcasting.
Got to write
unless you're
that
an
down. That's going to
HVAC
go in the chronic noob.
unless you're an HVAC tech. So we do want to think about music, maybe branded content, and there are some tools to do that. Canva is one of those. Descript is another. Those tools, again, head over to thinkergrowth.com. We'll talk about those over there. And if you caught any of our other webinars, we talk about those as well. Now, we got the intro. We end up in our episode, and we got this episode content. And I've got a path that we think is just a winning path. You'll see it in a lot of different podcasts. You do an episode intro, then you set up this foundational intrigue, which you start opening up about what it is that you want to talk about. You don't expose everything, but you start peeling the layers of the onion.
And that can look like asking questions like, oh gosh, why is my fridge cold? We can go into that, Why have you ever considered why your fridge stays cold? Have you ever considered that it might not be made to feel cold? It might be just taking the heat out. Something. Just going back to the fridge thing, it could be a question, something that seems so simple but gets you thinking. That maybe
and then
you
we
haven't thought
talk,
about it
and
that
then
way.
we say tonight we're going to talk about, or on this episode we're gonna expose the following, and that sets you up for what might come next. So one of the things we talked about early on is we're going to talk about the business of podcasting, and we laid out that roadmap right at the beginning because I hate not knowing where I'm going. When's the last time you got in a car with somebody and they were like, "Where?" and you said, "Where are we going?" And they're like, "I'm not telling you." How frustrating is that?
Oh, I'm being kidnapped.
Right? It very frustrating. As adults, we tend to like to know where we're going. So we do want to set up that intro. We also want to set up the foundational intrigue, and then I always suggest doing an ad, kind of like this one. This whole webinar is brought to you by the Thinker Growth community. We'll be back in 30 seconds. An ad, it keeps things moving, and it also honors your sponsors who are probably paying for your episode. Then after we got the intro, the foundational intrigue, the advertisement, and then we'd start opening up these questions or discussion. We dive deep into our topic where we have to be a good interviewer or a good monologuer, and not everybody is. And we kind of know who those people are in our world. But I'm also gonna just throw a line of hope out there into the ocean, which is your first episode's gonna be terrible. Your second episode might be terrible. Your third, fourth, 10th episode might be awful. Just do it, because by the time you get your 20th, your 30th, your 50th, you will have met somebody, you will have learned something along the way, you will have developed skills which are going to make you better at that and are also portable to something else. So should you start a podcast? In some sense, why not?
You're never going to get showing a message like that if you don't start it. Got to start somewhere.
That's exactly right. And then we do need to resolve, right, what we talked about during that podcast as well. So we set up intrigue, we broke it up with a little bit of advertisement, we go a little bit deeper, and then we recap that discussion, and then we close it out, which is what we call an outro. An outro is how you're going to sign off. Walk us through the sign-off process and what our options are that people should be thinking about.
Okay, you want to be thinking about this is something that I hadn't thought of. You want to be thinking about branding. That could be a little theme song. It could be, I don't know, maybe something like your intro, but like shorter or with perhaps might be different each episode. It could be the same each episode. This is where your intro usually is the same each episode, and then you go into introducing your episode, right? With the meat of the episode. But the outro, it can be the same every episode, or it can change with each episode. How many times can I say episode within this little bit that I'm speaking about? You're going to hear it more. So as you go through that, though, the outro, it might have, it might be different each time. It might be the same. It could possibly introduce the next episode. And maybe there might be a tagline. Is there a tagline, a quick, quippy little line you want to say for your viewers or your listeners? Something that either promotes your business or promotes the message, the overall vision that you have. Or it could be just a quick inspirational message if you want to share just an inspirational thought. There are lots of things you could add to your outro. Your outro is basically your chef's kiss on your episode. So make it you. You can be as creative or boring as you want to be. Just do whatever you want.
Absolutely. Like you talked about, be authentic and let whatever's in your soul get out. Now, there are a couple of places that people can go to get audio and do video intros, outros. I'm going to list 3 of them here for you. So take a note. One is Audio Jungle. Do a search for Audio Jungle. They've got royalty-free audio that you can use. And then there's also a tool called Render Forest. Render Forest allows you to create quick video snippets, intros, outros, interstitials, even longer format promotional videos. And then Canva. Canva is a great tool. All of these are inexpensive in the grand scheme of things. And then they don't require a whole lot of technological ability. You don't have to download a bunch of software and learn a bunch of things about audio editing if you don't want to. You can just head over to Render Forest, create yourself a quick intro, or head over to Canva and have one made for you as well. Keep that in mind when you're thinking about, like what Naomi's talking about, branding. How are you going to become memorable in a person's mind? That's your brand. How you show up, your personality, whatever that tone, that feeling is. That's what you're bringing out. That's what people are going to remember you for. That is going to lead us right into podcast production. So here's how it goes. You're going to develop your episode plan. You're going to go into pre-production. Now, pre-production involves a number of things, one of which is you're going to have to communicate with your guests, and you're going to have to know what they need and communicate when they're going to show up, how long to expect to be there, what questions you might ask. If you're going to have an author, for instance, on your show, they probably give you a sheet already that says, here's my book, and here's where to obtain my book. And these are the questions that I would like to be asked that I'm an expert on. Or you might be a conversation type podcast where you're just going to get on there and talk about or anything. Remember the old Seinfeld, the show about nothing, which became a super popular show?
Yep.
Because it's just following life. Coffeewithhumans.com. That Coffee with Humans is one of my podcasts. I've done 200 something episodes of that. And that is with complete strangers. I don't even know what we're going to talk about until we're until we go live. Then we get into post-production. So we've got our raw files and we go into post-production, at which point in time we need to edit that down. We need to be able to edit all into a file format that we can then distribute. Then we need to promote it. And then we also need to get into making money with this thing.
Numbers.
Absolutely. So the episode plan, topic and name of the episode. And we've got a checklist for you in the growth community. Join that. We'll get you that checklist, and you can go each episode. You can just go down this plan, the topic and name, the description of that episode, who the guests are, who the sponsors are going to be, when you're going to record that episode, when you're going to publish that episode. And then real importantly, you really should research these folks. You never see newscasters do an interview with somebody without knowing something about that person. They're not like, so
what's your name?
Right? Are you married? It's like, no, actually I'm not. Oh, I didn't know that, right? Nobody fumbles through these things. You shouldn't either if you're going to be I think, doing a really great job on a podcast. So episode plan, we'll quickly run here through pre-production. Pre-production, you schedule that episode.
Mm-hmm.
You communicate any questions with your guests. You'll go back and forth with them, and then factor in the time. I want to encourage people, factor in the time to communicate clearly with your guests about what's going on. I was asked to be on a podcast not all that long ago, and I ended up in a pre-production video call where we're talking about what we might talk about. And then I was like, great, I'm going to send you the details. And I never, ever received any details. And then I reached back out and I never received anything back. Super frustrating because I had already booked the time on my calendar to go to that event. And don't do that to people. Just communicate clearly and you'll save everybody a lot of hassle. Moving along here to post-production, you're going to have an audio and or maybe a video file that you're going to need to deal with. And you really need to know how to do that, or you need to have somebody who does. You'll apply the branding and the artwork and voiceovers, and then you're going to upload all that. Now, there are some tools that you can use to edit your podcast, which includes things like Audacity. Go to Audacity. Audacity's been around for a long time. It's free. And it edits waveforms. And if people don't know what waveforms are, just think that all those little squiggly lines that shows what audio looks like. That's the waveform. And then there are layers on that, and you have to learn how to deal with those layers. And so you're clipping things in and out. There's also a thing called Studio One, which is useful for all sorts of audio production. I use that for a good number of things. And I think you do too, Naomi, right?
Yes, I use. Well, okay. Here, full disclosure, I haven't used Studio One for a project yet. I've explored it. Audacity is 1, free, and 2, very user friendly. Studio One is if you know a little more about what you're doing and know more of exactly what you're going for and how to use the tools, it can do a lot more than Audacity. However, Audacity is going to be 1, again, free, and 2, it's going to be more user-friendly. So I have Studio One. I do need to learn it before my debut of The Chronic Noob. So that is something I will be doing this week. But yeah, Audacity is great. Studio One is fantastic as well. And I'll be learning just how fantastic this week.
One of the tools that we promote pretty frequently, and it's not like I'm making any money on this. I'm not going out to dinner based on the number of clicks, but Descript. Descript is a fantastic tool, which doesn't just use waveforms. You can look at the waveform if you want. It doesn't just use waveforms to allow editing, which is so key because the content that you're going to be using with a podcast or video cast is largely spoken word. And so Descript will transcribe it all. And then you can just go in and clip out the sections that you don't want. And then it also has some cool features like removal of large spaces of nothing said. And then what are called false starts or filler words. When I was like going, right? It'll take all those out.
Upon request.
And right, exact. Thank you. Yes, upon request, and it'll sandwich it back together, and it will make your video and audio a little more palatable, and depending on what the look and feel is you want to go for, the style you want to have, it can amp it up a little bit. It also allows you to get over some maybe newbie mistakes where you might want to edit out whole sections because you ask a question and then all of a sudden you end up down a path that you didn't want to go down. You're like, oh, that question makes no sense. Right? Which is the more a person gets into these conversational podcasts, the easier it becomes to just follow the flow and everybody's fine. Now, the other thing is we want to talk about promote. If you build it, they will not come. You have to promote this, and you're one of many. And you do also need to monitor the social media platforms for responses, and you must engage with people. If you've done anything on the LinkedIn platform recently, you know that one of the best things you can do is post, and then for about 15 minutes, just go off and comment on people. And that actually statistically increases the engagement of your posts. It's really no different than your podcast. If somebody's going to engage in your podcast, go on and say, hey, thanks. If they write a comment, hey, thanks. That goes for YouTube, goes for LinkedIn, goes for Facebook. If you get a review on iTunes, that's fantastic, but you're probably going to ask for those reviews. You're going to have to go on social media and ask for those. But promotion is a super important step that you do need to monitor.
Well, it's marketing.
It is.
It's
Which
a marketer.
the word I like to use is you got to lean in. And so many people don't lean in to their promotion because they're afraid or something. And I think about like the theater, right? So when you're in the theater, if you're up close and with the people who are acting, they are bigger than life. They're just massive on stage because they need to project to the back of the room. Otherwise, if they just went about their business in a normal way on stage, it would be lifeless. You have got to fill the space. Carolyn McHugh has a great quote in her TED Talk, and I really have to find that TED Talk. I keep talking about it. She says this: most of us don't take up nearly the space the universe intended for us. Most of us don't take up nearly the space the universe intended for us. And so if we think about the space that we could take up, our podcast is in the universe now. How are you going to go about promoting that? You've got to be bigger than your tiny little world at home. So key.
It's going to be pretty hard as well because especially, Kate, we talked about this earlier. The first 1 to 10 to maybe 50 episodes of your podcast might be crap. And if you know they're crap, how can you commit to leaning into that? Here, come watch my crappy episode. It's kind of scary. What's the worst that can happen? Here's the other thing too. Again, I mentioned this earlier in this webinar. This is the first webinar I've ever hosted or co-hosted. You've done a little bit more talking than I have. But if me saying that at the beginning, if you didn't know this was my first webinar, it'd be like, wow, I'm not talking very much. I'm not super engaging. It doesn't seem like I know what I'm doing. But right off the bat, telling you this is the first webinar I've hosted, there's kind of that, I don't know, grace that maybe I'll get. You know, if you guys want to shred me for my technique later, that's fine too.
You should put it in the comments. Put it in the comments. If you want to eat her up now, drop it in the comments.
But here's the thing. You have to lean in, though. You have to lean in. Say, this is the beginning of my podcast. This is the beginning of my idea. This is the beginning of my vision. And maybe you're not totally clear on your vision. Maybe you're not completely, maybe you won't know. Think of the first season of all of your favorite TV shows. Is it there yet? Does it have the vibe yet? One of them I've heard about is Parks and Rec. So many people have told me I have to go in the second season and then go back and watch the first season for Origin. I have yet to do that. I haven't tried that yet, but I believe it. I believe it 100%. So when you're leaning in, you have to lean in to your end result. You have to lean in to where your journey is going. I know it's weird to lean into something that you know it's your first pancake. It's going to be weird. It's going to be either overdone or underdone. That's fine. It's a pancake. It's food. It's sustenance. Eat it. Okay? Promote it. Lean in. Get in there. You got to think long term. Keep your head in the game. You got to play that long game. You have to think long term. Lean in, even if it's crappy. Even if you don't feel like you have your footing. Even if it's messy and lots of pauses and lots of sidetracking. Lean in 100% because it's going to be great, but only if you give yourself the propulsion and allow other people to support you in giving yourself the propulsion that you need. Go for it. Lean in 100%.
That idea that you bring up, where you gotta align yourself with other people who bring you up and bring you into your future. If you are aligned right now with people who are not excited about you and about your dreams, you're with the wrong people. Yes. And it sounds harsh, and I get it. I feel bad sometimes in my soul saying that too. But here's the thing: if most of us don't take up nearly the space the universe intended for us, when we go to promote ourselves out there, the first thing we're going to get is a hater. 100%. Somebody's going to be like,
Yeah.
I didn't think you did that so well. It's like, you're no kidding. I didn't. This is the first time I've done it.
I didn't
Back
think
off.
so either.
Right. Right. Exactly. Right.
You and me
And I don't
both on the
like
same
you.
team.
It's like, sometimes I don't like myself. So suck it.
Join,
But
join the club. Matching t-shirts.
so one of those things is you just got to get through it. You got to
Mhm.
put yourself out there. You've got to get your message. If you have a message, a product, a service that you believe is going to change the world, you have to go do that. You got to be good at doing that. The growth community is there to support you, but we can't do the work for you.
Nope.
You've got to go lean in, and you can do that in a handful of different ways. Number one is you got to create audio clips of what people might expect in your podcast. You got to create maybe audiograms. You don't have to, but you got to create some sort of clip. It could be audiogram, it could be an audio clip, which is going to give them insights into what they will experience next time they listen and devote 20 minutes to your podcast. Video clips. Video clips are easy. Again, that tool Descript that we talked about before, a great tool to create audiograms, video clips, audio clips. Pay attention to your artwork. People, just like people eat with their eyes first, people consume content with their eyes first. And somebody's going to say, take exception, say, well, what if you're blind? I get it. I understand that. But people are
It's so
judging you. There's two types of people who are going to do business with you: people who love you and people who are not yet sure they should love you. All the people who love you forgive your sins, and all the people who are not yet sure they should love you judge you. And that is just the way it is. So if you don't like it, I don't know what to tell you. But you could do something about it. You could just learn to present yourself better. In silly story, we got just a handful of minutes left, and I appreciate everybody's time here learning how to start podcasting as part of the Think Your Growth community. Years ago, I would walk around my office, and I was over caffeinated programming, and apparently I was offending people, my employees, because they thought I was a grump. And I wasn't meaning to become a grump. I had just had too much caffeine until one day somebody said, hey, you might want to consider just letting us know if you've had too much caffeine. I was like, you know what? That makes sense, because I realized how I was expressing myself in the space wasn't working. And everybody, and it wasn't that they didn't understand, but it's just like, that's kind of off-putting. Okay, that's all right. I could adjust. And all of us, when we're going to put ourselves out in the space of the universe, be yourself, but it doesn't mean you couldn't be better. So be the best version you possibly could be of yourself. Along the lines of promotion, also the text, the descriptions, the transcripts, make sure that you understand that those transcripts, use them. They go in YouTube descriptions, they go on blogs, and that helps with people who are searching. Your audio actually is searched on some platforms, believe it or not, but the text of what is in that description, that is used as well. So you will become more searchable, better able to be found, let's say, if you put the transcript in the description. Now, the business of podcasting. Let's say you've set up a podcast and you're using it as part of your business, which means it needs to lead somewhere to a sale, revenue. You're going to have expenses as part of this podcast. It doesn't have to be big, but it's going to be there. So money and time, who's going to pay to cover those costs? Your time and your money. And there are ways to break this down. We can help you through that if you're thinking about, this long-term vision. And then who's going to pay? Who's going to pay that? Is it cash? Is it affiliate? Is it in kind? Is it a sponsorship? Is your podcast being hosted free by some place because they're sponsoring you in kind? Is your manufacturing company, are they sponsoring your podcast because you are bringing in business for them? Think about it and be able to back up the value that you're creating with correlated with those expenses, and make sure that it really makes sense. Because if you ever want sponsors, they're gonna dig into the details and figure out, does anybody care about the message that you have out there? And you just got to know it. If you're gonna use this as a business, you should know that. And then in the home stretch here, got just a couple minutes left. Again, thanks for joining us. The roles. There are roles that you need to think about. You may fill all of them or some of them. And as your podcast scales, one of the best ways to scale that is to get other people to fill these roles. So you need a host, somebody to do guest outreach and scheduling. There are show scripts. You're going to have editors for audio and video. Then you're going to have somebody to distribute this thing. It's going to have to be not only edited, but it's going to have to be posted on the various platforms. And then you're going to have to get marketing out there. Who's going to create those clips and send them out on your social media? And then who's going to analyze all that and figure out what's working, what's not working, so that you can do less of what's not working and more of what's working. And then if you're going to get sponsors, you got to do sponsor outreach. It's a sales process. Yeah. Again, if you build it, they will come. It's a great. It's only in the field of dreams, which is why they call it Field of Dreams, not Field of Real Life. So, so the business of podcasting, you gotta pay attention to the roles. Naomi, is there anything that we've missed here? We got about 2 minutes left before we move along. Anything that we've missed or anything you want to cover?
Not anything that comes to mind particularly, other than I can't stress this enough, y'all. Descript, get it, 100% get it. It's worth every penny, right? Yes, because you taught me how to use it this week. You showed me what it does. Literally, you can cut out audio, and then if there's like a break in sound, you still have like visuals. And so if you want to pull like the whole, Jim Halpert, the look thing, you can, nix the audio or nix background sound and still have your moment. So just it's a beautiful tool. I cannot stress this enough. It'll help with the whole process, and I'm going to be diving into that this week as well.
That's awesome. Well, your next steps, I never want to end something without the next steps. And I hope that what we've provided here has introduced you to the concepts that you need to know to make a decision about whether podcasting is right for you and whether you should proceed further. The next steps are join the community at thinkergrowth.com. I'm super proud of that. It's just launching. You are among the first to know, simply because you are on this webinar. So join the community at thinkergrowth.com. You're going to get free networking, resources, expert Q&A, and then we've got training courses and future certifications, which are available for all you smarty pants who want to level up in your careers and get that promotion, add to your skill set, and become more popular and lovable, likable. It's great. You free bus passes. I don't even know what happens if you get a certification in the Thinker Growth community, but I've heard it's pretty epic. And then the other thing is, I do want to say this: do something and start anywhere. Do something, start anywhere. If you're on the fence about podcasting, make a decision to do something, whether it's research a little bit further or just start it. Start anywhere. Ask the question, the question that you think is stupid. Go ahead and ask it. 1,000 people are waiting for you to ask it. It's okay. It is not a dumb question. You just don't know the answer, and that's okay. There's all sorts of things that as we grow into these things, like Naomi's going to be doing on the Chronic Noob, her podcast that's coming up, that you're always starting someplace. You're always new to something, and if you're not growing. So if you'd never coming to a point like Naomi here is on this webinar where you're just like, this is my first thing and I'm a little bit terrified, but I'm gonna stick it out because the first one might be terrible, but the 10th one might be great. We are always at that point. So you're among friends. I promise you. I've done 500 episodes of live streams and podcasts, and this is a no-brainer, but I find myself all the time at the tip of something that's like, man, I'm not so sure about this, and I get a little pit in my stomach. That's okay. That means you're human. You're not a psychopath. Congratulations. Yeah. We also have consulting one-on-one for anybody who is really looking to take a deep dive into your branding and what a podcast might mean to you and how to make more money and get your message out there to the world. Again, the Thinker Growth community is all about world-changing people doing world-changing things. We want to help you get at communicating the message that you believe might change the world. If you have questions, let us know. Thanks for joining us. Naomi, congratulations on your first ever webinar. You did a fantastic job.
Thank you. I sat here.
Alrighty.
So hard.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.